Millionaire husband chooses mistress over pregnant wife, even during her hospital stay. Ava never imagined that her life would spiral from a fairy tale marriage into an endless nightmare, yet here she was, lying in a stark white hospital bed, clutching her unborn child in fear and heartbreak. Her husband, James, once the charming millionaire who swept her off her feet, had chosen his mistress's company over his wife's fragile state. Whispers echoed through hospital corridors, pitying glances were cast her way, and Ava felt the crushing weight of betrayal. But fate has a way of rebelling against injustice. As secrets unravel and shocking twists come to light, the stage is set for a reckoning no one could have foreseen. Ava Winston always believed in fairy tales. As a child, she devoured storybooks filled with sweeping romances, grand castles, and happily ever afters. There were nights she'd stay up, flashlight under the covers, reading about princesses and brave knights until her eyes drooped. Perhaps it was this childhood longing, or perhaps a predisposition to see the best in people, that led Ava to trust so fully when she met James. He arrived in her life like a sunbeam piercing through a storm-laden sky. They met at a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The air was thick with chatter and the clink of champagne flutes. Ava had been wearing a simple yet elegant black dress. Despite her natural beauty, she felt out of place among the wealthy art patrons. She was there only because a friend who worked in the museum's acquisitions department had invited her as a stand-in date. Ava still remembered that first moment she locked eyes with James. She was admiring a luminous Monet painting when she sensed someone step beside her. When she turned, his tall figure and mesmerizing blue eyes took her by surprise. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo that hinted at his affluence. The only imperfection Ava noticed was his slightly crooked tie, which she found endearing. Monet's Sunrise over Venice, James had remarked softly, pointing at the brushstrokes. So many layers hidden beneath the surface. You can stare at it all night and still find new details. He spoke with a confidence that suggested deep knowledge of art, of life, and all things in between. Ava felt the flutter of butterflies in her stomach. They struck up a conversation that lasted the entire gala. He asked about her life, her passions, and her dreams. She found herself opening up to a stranger in a way she never had before. By the end of the night, she felt as though she had known him forever. James Winston was, by all outward measures, a self-made success story. Born in a modest family in Ohio, he had clawed his way into an Ivy League education at Harvard Business School. There was the real name of an institution that often carried weight. Armed with sheer determination and a remarkable talent for numbers, he built a thriving investment firm that managed portfolios for elite clients worldwide. He was in his early 30s, handsome, and exuded a calm, approachable energy despite the hectic swirl of life around him. Soon after the gala, James invited Ava to dinner. He picked a renowned, Michelin-starred restaurant, the type of place Ava had only seen in magazines. Even though the setting was extravagant, James brought a relaxed warmth to the evening. He rarely spoke about the extent of his wealth. Instead, he asked about Ava's job as a children's illustrator and praised her for fueling young minds with creativity. Over the following months, their romance blossomed into a whirlwind courtship. Weekly dinners turned into weekend getaways turned into short vacations. Ava found herself on private jets, heading to scenic locales she'd only dreamed about: Greek Isles, Swiss chalets, scenic beaches in the Maldives. Yet through it all, James remained grounded, or so she believed. He listened attentively when Ava talked about her work or her family. He made her feel like an invaluable treasure in his life. They got engaged under a cherry blossom tree in Central Park. With petals softly cascading, he knelt on one knee, a diamond ring glittering in the morning sunlight. Ava's yes came through tears and laughter. This moment, she was certain, was the beginning of her happily ever after. Within a year, they were married in a lavish ceremony at the Rockefeller Center. Society pages celebrated the event as the wedding of the season. Photographs showed Ava radiant in a designer gown, James beaming as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Friends and family toasted them with champagne, their blessings echoing through the gilded ballroom. People whispered that Ava was lucky to have found a man like James, a gem among the wealthy who remained genuine and kind. For a while, it seemed like everything was perfect. Their penthouse in Manhattan overlooked Central Park, a testament to James's success. Ava continued her work illustrating children's books, often donating her time to charities for underprivileged kids. James poured his energy into his investment firm, Winston Capital, occasionally roping Ava into glamorous events and dinner parties with potential clients. In the early days of their marriage, it was the little things that melted Ava's heart. James leaving a handwritten note on the kitchen counter wishing her a good day, or the way he'd surprise her with homemade pancakes on Sunday mornings, albeit slightly burnt around the edges. Soon enough, the couple decided it was time to start a family. They both dreamed of the pitter-patter of tiny feet echoing in the penthouse hallways. With each other's support, they felt ready. Unbeknownst to Ava, that dream would become both her greatest joy and her darkest sorrow, for the moment she discovered she was pregnant was also the beginning of everything unraveling. 2 lines appeared on the pregnancy test. Excited, Ava rushed to the study where James was poring over charts, figures, and lines of code from his analysts. She burst in, breathless, her heart pounding with exhilaration. "We're having a baby!" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. James's expression flickered from surprise to delight. He swept Ava into his arms, the warmth of his embrace reassuring her. "This is amazing news," he said, pressing a kiss against her temple. For a moment, they both stood there, imagining the future with a child in their arms, a completion of their little family. In the weeks that followed, Ava noticed subtle changes in James's demeanor. The first shift was how frequently his phone buzzed late at night. He'd excuse himself to another room to take calls. When she asked, he'd say it was a client from overseas or an urgent matter from the Tokyo office. At first, she didn't question it. James often worked with international contact, but the frequency of these calls grew, and the hush in his voice when he talked triggered uneasy feelings. Then came the business trips. Ava was 3 months pregnant when James began traveling more often. He claimed deals needed delicate negotiations or in-person sign-offs. These absences gnawed at her. Though she tried to maintain a trusting perspective, she couldn't chase away the creeping suspicion that something was off. She'd find lipstick smudges on his handkerchief or trace faint perfume scents not her own on his shirts. She battled with herself. Could it be a colleague's unintentional brush, or was she overthinking? Adding to her anxiety, James's warmth receded. Gone were the random notes, the stolen moments of romance. Even as her belly started to show, and she excitedly pored over nursery designs, James seemed distant. At night, he'd be glued to his phone or slump onto the couch with a drink, exhaustion etched across his features. One evening, Ava decided to confront him gently. She found him on their balcony, staring at the city lights. The hum of traffic from below filled the lull in their conversation. "James," Ava began, placing a tentative hand on his arm. "Is everything okay? Work seems to be taking up so much of your time lately," he exhaled slowly. "I'm fine, Ava. Just a big project, some crucial negotiations. Everything's on the line." He turned to her with a tired smile. "I'm sorry if I've been distant. I promise, once this deal closes, I'll be back to normal." His explanation calmed her for a moment, and she wrapped her arms around him, wanting to believe every word. But the cracks continued to show. Strange credit card charges began popping up in their statements: extravagant jewelry, exclusive restaurants, luxury hotels in the city. When Ava questioned James, he brushed it off as client entertainment. She wanted to trust him, but the dissonance was there, like a discordant note in a melodic symphony, impossible to ignore. Anxiety welled inside her, especially as her pregnancy advanced. Ava yearned for her husband's emotional support. She tried to talk to friends, but she kept the details vague, not wanting to paint James in a bad light. Marriages have rough patches, an older friend advised. Communication is key. Don't jump to conclusions. Ava tried to be the devoted wife, giving James space and believing that if she loved him enough, it would all work out. She didn't know she was feeding into the very illusions that masked the betrayal blooming in the shadows. It started with a name: Nicole Carter. Late one night, Ava had been unable to sleep, her mind buzzing with insomnia and unspoken fears. She wandered into the living room to find James's laptop. Often, she used it to browse design ideas or watch baby-related videos. She turned it on, only to discover that James had forgotten to close his email tab. Something in the pit of her stomach twisted when she saw an email chain open with the subject line, "Our weekend at the plaza." The sender? Nicole Carter. The content? A conversation about their incredible night, the memories they'd made, and a desire to see him again soon. Attached were photos: Nicole, tall, brunette, model-like posture, lounging in a lavish plaza hotel suite, wearing hardly anything at all. Ava's breath caught in her throat. The world felt like it was spinning, and she was the only fixed point, dizzying from the onslaught of pain. Her hands trembled. She clicked through the messages, each new paragraph reinforcing the truth. James was having an affair. Rage and heartbreak collided in her chest. She felt a searing pain near her ribs, as if betrayal had lodged there like a knife. "How could he?" Ava whispered, pressing a trembling hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. She was carrying his child, devoting herself to their life together, only to find out that he was secretly romancing another woman. When James emerged from the bedroom and found her hunched over the laptop, tears streaming down her face, a flash of panic crossed his features. He reached out to close the device, but it was too late. Ava jerked away. They locked eyes, hers burned with heartbreak, his flared with guilt and indignation. "Ava, it's not what it looks like," James started, his voice taut with tension. She stood up, her eyes blazing, tears wet on her cheeks. "Not what it looks like? Then what is it?" "Our weekend at the plaza." "Who is Nicole Carter? Tell me right now." James opened his mouth to speak, but no sound emerged at first. He exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. "Look, it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment. It's over. It won't happen again." Ava stared at him, her heartbreak giving way to anger. "Don't lie to me. I read the entire chain. It's not over. You've been seeing her for months. While I'm here pregnant with your child planning our life together, you're out at the plaza with her." James winced. "Yes, I've been seeing her. But you must believe me. You can't possibly justify this," Ava shot back, voice trembling. "How dare you?" A torrent of tears and accusations followed. Ava demanded answers, demanded James end it immediately. He promised he would. He swore up and down that the affair had meant nothing, that it was just an escape. He'd blame stress from work, the fear of impending fatherhood, anything but facing that this was a direct betrayal of everything they had built. In the aftermath, he moved out temporarily, staying at a hotel, assuring Ava he needed space to sort things out. Confused and heartbroken, Ava told him to go. She couldn't bear to see his face. A part of her, however, clung to hope that he'd realize his mistake and come home, contrite and ready to be the husband and father he was supposed to be. But as weeks turned to months, that hope dimmed. James grew more distant, sometimes not answering her calls. When he did, conversations revolved around pragmatic matters. Have you gone to your prenatal checkups? Is everything okay with the baby? He never addressed their relationship with sincere regret or attempted to fix what he'd broken. Ava's heartbreak could have shattered her, but she found purpose in the child growing inside her. She poured her love into that unborn life, determined to keep her stress levels low for the baby's sake. But the emotional toll weighed on her, and soon her body would show the strain in the most drastic way possible. By the time Ava hit the 7th month of her pregnancy, the emotional turmoil had taken a serious toll. She was exhausted, unable to sleep properly, constantly battling the swirling thoughts of James's infidelity and the uncertain future. Though she tried to keep a brave face, the cracks in her emotional armor were deep. One afternoon, as Ava was cleaning out the nursery, deciding which pastel shade to paint the walls, she felt a stabbing pain in her abdomen. She cried out, dropping the paintbrush. Instantly, she knew something was wrong. Her heart hammered. She grabbed her phone and dialed her closest friend, Elise, who lived just a few blocks away. Within minutes, Elise arrived. Finding Ava pale, bent over in agony, a frantic rush to Mount Sinai Hospital in New York followed. Nurses wheeled Ava into an examination room, hooking her up to machines that monitored the baby's heartbeat. Ava's thoughts spiraled. She prayed silently. She couldn't lose this child. This child was her light, the anchor to all the dreams she held dear. The doctors discovered that Ava was experiencing acute stress, leading to dangerously high blood pressure. They were worried about potential complications like preeclampsia. You need rest and absolute minimal stress, the attending physician told her in a firm tone. We may have to keep you here for observation. Ava's eyes filled with tears. Whatever it takes, she whispered, desperate to protect her baby. Lying on the hospital bed, she felt the sting of betrayal sharper than ever. She wanted to call James, but part of her balked. He was the source of her greatest pain. Still, he was the father of her child. She reluctantly made the call. After several rings, James picked up. Ava's voice trembled as she explained the situation, her fear and worry barely contained. I'm in the hospital, James. There are complications, she said softly. She had expected him to rush over, to be by her side, but his reaction was disturbingly calm, if not distant. Don't panic, he said. I'll check my schedule and see if I can come by soon. Make sure you do what the doctors say. Ava's heart sank. There was no urgency in his tone, no immediate promise that he would drop everything to be with her. She was carrying his child, potentially facing life-threatening complications, yet he treated it like a minor inconvenience. He'd pencil into his calendar. It cut deeper than words could express. Days passed, and James didn't show. Nurses came and went, hooking her up to the 4th drips, checking vitals, ensuring the baby was stable. Elise dropped in regularly, bringing warm meals and gentle reassurance. He's busy, Ava told herself over and over, trying to find excuses for him. He'll come eventually. And eventually, he did, though not alone. Ava nearly gasped when, on the 4th day of her hospital stay, the door swung open and in walked James, with Nicole Carter on his arm. A fury of emotion slammed into Ava. She lay propped up on pillows, her hospital gown loose around her belly. Nicole looked impeccable, wearing a designer coat, her hair styled to perfection as if she were heading to a runway show rather than a hospital visit. James, Ava managed, shock lacing her voice. What is she doing here? James cleared his throat, looking at Nicole as if for support. I thought it would be good for you both to meet. Nicole has, well, she has a better understanding of the situation than you might think. And I want a better understanding, Ava blurted. She felt tears sting her eyes. I'm lying here, heavily pregnant, with complications, and you bring your mistress here? Are you out of your mind? Nicole frowned, placing a hand on James's arm. I'm sorry if this is upsetting, she said, her tone betraying that she wasn't very sorry at all. James just wanted me to be here for moral support. He's been so worried about you, and I'm here to help. Ava was speechless. Anger roiled through her. She mustered the strength to sit up straighter, ignoring the throbbing ache in her abdomen and the beep of monitors. You have no right, she seethed. This is my child, my life. James should be here for me, not you. James's face hardened. He seemed torn between guilt and defiance. Ava, you need to calm down for your health, he muttered. We can talk about this later. Get out, Ava choked, tears streaming. Both of you, now. James didn't move. Nicole gave a half-sympathetic shrug, as though Ava was some obstinate child having a tantrum. Fury burned hot in Ava's chest, so intense that she feared it would send her vitals skyrocketing. Then, the monitors began to beep urgently. A nurse rushed in, concern etched across her features. Her blood pressure is spiking, the nurse said sharply to James and Nicole. Visiting hours are over. I need you to leave. They filed out with expressions that flickered between annoyance and worry. Ava closed her eyes, tears leaking onto her pillow. Betrayal lanced through her yet again. James couldn't even put aside his affair for the sake of her health and the babies. As she lay there, trembling with anger and heartbreak, a realization took hold. She could no longer rely on him or trust that he would do the right thing. She would have to summon the strength to protect herself and her child, no matter the cost. Days rolled into weeks. Ava remained in the hospital under close observation. Each morning, she woke to the antiseptic scent of the ward, nurses offering her a polite smile, doctors reminding her to rest as much as possible to ensure the baby's safety. Inside, she felt hollow, as though James's betrayal had scooped out her soul and left her on autopilot. James visited sporadically, often accompanied by Nicole. Their presence became a spectacle of heartbreak for everyone on the floor. Whispered gossip among nurses floated through the corridors. They pitied the beautiful pregnant woman whose millionaire husband flaunted his mistress right in front of her. Whenever James came, he'd bring the conversation back to logistical matters, money, medical bills, arrangements for the child. Ava would stare blankly, tears often threatening to spill, until she forced them back. She was determined not to break down in front of them. She refused to give them the satisfaction of her despair. Once, Ava tried to reason with James when Nicole wasn't around. She asked him why he was doing this to her, why he wouldn't at least shield her from his affair during such a vulnerable time. He rubbed his temples, as though discussing an exasperating business issue. You don't understand how stressful it's been, he insisted. Between the baby, my firm, and expectations, I needed an outlet. And Nicole understands me. She's supportive in a way that Ava snapped. In a way that I'm not. I'm your wife. I was the one who supported you from the start, who believed in you when you were building your firm, who went to all those events by your side. I'm the one carrying your child, and you can't see how wrong this is. James shook his head, frustration twisting his features. Ava, I'm not going to argue with you about this. The point is, I've made my choice, and I want to ensure everything is stable for when our child arrives. We can reach some arrangement that benefits all of us. Her stomach turned. She stared at him in disbelief. Some arrangement? Are you talking about me and the baby being on the side while you and Nicole play house? He shrugged. I'm not heartless, Ava. I'll always provide for you financially. A growl of fury formed in her throat. She turned away, pulling the bedsheet up as if it could shield her from the cruelty. Leave. Just go, she muttered. Get out, James. He left without another word. Ava clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms, swallowing the sob that threatened to escape. In that moment, she finally accepted the truth. The man she loved, the father of her child, had become a stranger, someone unrecognizable, consumed by selfishness and lust. Ava's doctors feared that her stress levels might trigger early labor or cause harm to the baby. They insisted she remain in bed, connected to monitors that beeped ominously every time her heartbeat spiked with emotional distress. She found solace in the visits of her friend Elise, who brought her homemade meals, and occasionally in the gentle company of some kind nurses who'd talk to her like a friend, offering a compassionate ear. Still, dark thoughts plagued Ava. She felt abandoned, humiliated, and terrified about what the future held. She questioned her own worth. Could James really just discard her like an old toy? Did he ever truly love her, or was their entire relationship built on illusions? Yet each time despair threatened to swallow her, she placed a hand on her growing belly and remembered the life within. The baby's small kicks and flutters reminded her she had something precious to fight for. She resolved then that she wouldn't let James's betrayal define her or break her spirit. One day she would rise from these ashes. The shift in James's fortunes began subtly. Whispers emerged in financial circles that Winston Capital was facing internal turbulence. Long-standing clients complained of erratic performance and questionable trades. The press caught wind of potential SEC inquiries into some of James's more innovative investment strategies. For a while, James kept up a front of confidence. With the mistress by his side at charity balls and exclusive gatherings, he appeared the picture of success, tall, elegant, brimming with self-assurance. But behind closed doors, cracks spread through the foundation he had built. Investors started withdrawing funds. James scrambled for new clients to offset the losses, but word traveled fast in New York's financial district. He poured money into hush-hush deals, some crossing legal grey areas. Anxiety gnawed at him. He lashed out at employees, fired longtime associates, and replaced them with younger recruits who worked brutal hours for less pay. The more desperate he became, the more ruthless he grew, but the downfall seemed inevitable. While Ava remained in the hospital, James found himself juggling a mistress who demanded luxurious gifts, a failing business that required constant triage, and the rising costs of secret legal troubles. Ironically, Ava was the least of his worries, though her condition was no less severe. In his mind, she was a burden, someone he'd handle once the baby arrived. He didn't realize that fate had begun weaving a very different tapestry, one that would teach him a lesson he would never forget. Ava's blood pressure skyrocketed one afternoon when she was roughly 8 months pregnant. Alarms pierced the sterile hospital hallways, and nurses rushed in with the fourth medication and urgent instructions for her to stay calm. Her vision swam, a haze of grey creeping into the edges. She clutched her belly, tears of fear tracing down her cheeks. Time blurred. She recalled fainting, then voices calling out medical jargon. When she regained consciousness, it was a day later, and a doctor informed her they had been forced to perform an emergency C-section to save her life and the baby's. "It was a tense operation, but you and your son are stable now," the doctor said kindly, patting her hand. "He's a bit premature, so he'll need some time in the NICU, but he's a strong little fighter." Ava's heart trembled with relief. She was a mother now, a mother to a tiny boy who had braved this world earlier than expected. She'd name him Oliver. She'd always loved the name, and it felt right. In the days that followed, Ava was too weak to leave her bed, but she insisted on seeing Oliver. Nurses, touched by her determination, arranged for a wheelchair and guided her to the neonatal intensive care unit. The moment she laid eyes on that fragile, beautiful infant in the incubator, her heart expanded with unconditional love. She carefully slipped her hand inside and let her finger rest gently on his tiny palm. Oliver's little fingers twitched, almost as if recognizing her. Ava cried tears of joy, gratitude, and heartbreak all at once. She waited for James to appear, hoping that the birth of his son might spark some paternal instinct, some measure of decency. But he was nowhere to be seen. Days passed. Oliver grew stronger, eventually breathing on his own without a ventilator. Ava remained under care, still recovering, though her progress was steady. Finally, James showed up, not with balloons or congratulations, but with that same cold, matter-of-fact demeanor. Nicole was absent this time, which was a small mercy. The conversation that ensued felt like a negotiation, not a celebration of new life. "He looks healthy," James said, glancing at Oliver through the NICU window. Ava swallowed, her voice hoarse. "He is." A miracle, really. James nodded mechanically, then turned to Ava. "How are you?" "Exhausted," Ava replied, her tone cool. "But stable, thank God. The doctors say I'll recover fully if I rest." James fiddled with his jacket sleeve. "Look, about the living arrangements. We should figure that out soon. I need to travel for business. There's a crucial meeting in London next week. But I want to ensure you and the baby have everything you need." Ava stared at him, incredulous. "That's all you have to say? Our son nearly died, and you're talking about business trips." He averted his gaze. "Things are complicated. I'll make sure finances aren't an issue." Ava's heart shattered anew. He spoke as if he were ticking boxes, fulfilling an obligation. She realized that expecting him to care beyond the child's material needs was pointless. In the following days, James disappeared again. This time, Ava decided she would not chase him, would not call or beg. Her focus was on Oliver and her own health. She would forge ahead, with or without James's help. But the cosmic scale of justice was already in motion, preparing a downfall for James far harsher than Ava had imagined. In the days and weeks after Ava's emergency C-section and Oliver's premature birth, a stark reckoning began to unfold for James Winston. Rumors of trouble at Winston Capital had been circulating for months, whispered at exclusive cocktail parties and in the hushed corridors of Manhattan's financial district. But at first, these rumors seemed too outlandish to be true. After all, James was the charismatic wonder boy, a Harvard alumnus who built his investment firm from scratch. How could the man who once seemed invincible be on the verge of losing everything? Yet, just beneath the glossy surface of success, something rotten had taken root. When James first began straying from Ava, neglecting her emotional needs, and forging a reckless path with Nicole, he had also started making bolder, riskier moves in his professional life. Investors noticed unexplained fluctuations in their portfolios. Certain returns appeared too good, too consistent to be legitimate. A handful of worried clients quietly pulled their assets and fled. However, James insisted every setback was part of a greater plan. If questioned, he would fold his hands calmly, flash a reassuring smile, and remind them of his track record. As Ava lay recovering in the hospital, Winston Capital's troubles reached a boiling point. A scathing expose in a well-regarded financial paper dissected James's suspiciously brilliant trades over the previous year. The article pointed to potential misrepresentations in Winston Capital's marketing materials and flagged an increasing lack of transparency in the firm's accounting. While it stopped short of outright calling James's actions fraudulent, the insinuation was loud and clear. This wasn't just a business hiccup, it was a red alert warning. Boardrooms across New York buzzed with speculation, and longtime allies of James began distancing themselves. The firm's public relations department scrambled to perform damage control, issuing carefully worded statements that categorically denied any wrongdoing. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, And in the investment world, even a sliver of distrust is enough to trigger a mass exodus. Privately, James felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Lawsuits started flooding in from former clients who claimed they were misled about the nature of his investments. High net worth individuals, once dazzled by James's smooth talk and his promises of exponential returns, suddenly demanded their money back. Some threatened to go to the Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) if James did not comply. Pressed for liquidity, he tried to maneuver funds internally to appease them. But the liquidity simply wasn't there anymore. The holes in his portfolio were too large to patch. Faced with mounting pressure, James did the one thing he'd always sworn he would never do. He broke his own moral and legal boundaries further. He authorized a series of behind-the-scenes deals that his compliance officers would never have approved if they had known about them at all. This might have bought him a few weeks of superficial calm, but it also drew the attention of vigilant watchdogs. The moment Winston Capital's name landed on an SEC watch list, a high alert signal flashed across the federal agencies that monitored financial crimes. In a desperate bid to maintain a facade of normalcy, James made carefully staged public appearances. He still wore expensive suits and kept Nicole on his arm, attending black-tie galas to project confidence. But behind the smiles, James's mind was a frenzy of calculations and dread. He barely slept, hounded by phone calls at all hours, lawyers, potential whistleblowers, furious investors. Even Nicole noticed his growing irritability and the dark circles beneath his eyes. She began questioning whether staying with him was still a wise investment in her own future. Then came the defining moment. Early one Friday morning, just as James was trying to finalize the sale of his cherished penthouse, SEC officials, accompanied by agents from the FBI's Financial Crime Unit, executed a search warrant on Winston Capital's corporate headquarters. Employees arrived at work to find their sleek, glass-walled offices swarming with men and women in suits, carrying boxes of files and seizing computers. Some staffers were escorted to conference rooms for questioning. Others watched in terror as the entire place was turned upside down. The raid instantly made national headlines. Photos of agents hauling out document boxes and servers splashed across television screens. Competitors, who once envied James's rapid rise, spoke in hushed, sympathetic tones, relieved it wasn't their firm under siege. The financial world loves a darling, but it loves a scandal even more. Watching the live coverage from a borrowed executive suite in a nearby hotel, James felt his stomach drop. Never had he looked more pale or terrified. His phone blew up with calls from senior employees. "The feds are everywhere. They took my laptop. They're looking for you." Panic set in among staff who had believed Winston Capital was simply in a slump rather than on the verge of a meltdown. As the magnitude of the investigation sank in, people began updating resumes, calling headhunters, or deleting their own digital tracks, anything to avoid being tainted by association. James realized that if he didn't take immediate action, he could be facing not just bankruptcy, but prison. His lawyers advised him to cooperate fully with investigators, to hand over every piece of incriminating evidence in exchange for possible leniency. Pride flared in him. He had spent years building Winston Capital to reflect his own genius, but survival instincts swiftly overrode any attachment to that glory. He had to protect himself at all costs. With a trembling hand, James dialed the phone numbers of key federal investigators. He offered partial confessions, enough to guide them to the documents they wanted, hoping that such cooperation might spare him the harshest penalties. He then greenlit his legal team to negotiate a deal, no criminal charges, only civil penalties, provided he surrendered relevant evidence. and never again held a leadership position in the financial sector. It was a humiliating outcome for a man whose face had once graced the covers of business magazines under headlines proclaiming him the new titan of Wall Street. The final blow came when the judge approved emergency measures to freeze James's personal assets. His bank accounts, shares, and real estate holdings became pawns in the legal system. Overnight, James went from flamboyant millionaire to a man with little more than the cash in his wallet. Even Nicole, as ambitious and image-conscious as she was, recognized that James's downfall threatened her own lifestyle. She had no desire to stand by a man vilified in the media, hounded by lawsuits, and rendered virtually penniless. Despite his promises and pleas, she saw the writing on the wall. With minimal warning, she packed her designer luggage and walked out of his penthouse, a penthouse he was days away from surrendering anyway. In a matter of weeks, everything James had prided himself on crumbled to ruin. The luxury cars he'd once boasted about on social media were quietly sold at auction. His art collection, meant to dazzle guests and preserve his cultural cachet, was liquidated, each painting going at a fraction of its original worth. The lavish penthouse sold for far below market price, snapped up by foreign investors who saw a once-in-a-lifetime deal. The staff he'd cultivated, from personal assistants to high-level executives, dispersed to competitors or found new positions, leaving James alone in echoing hallways that smelled of packing tape and cardboard boxes. In all this time, while lawyers hammered out deals and investigators questioned him, James barely thought of Ava and Oliver. He was too consumed by his own impending doom, too fearful of handcuffs and scandal. Deep in his heart, he knew he owed them something, at the very least, an apology or a shred of accountability. But the internal mantra of, "I'll handle that later," kept cycling through his mind. Whenever pangs of guilt surfaced, he shoved them aside, telling himself there were bigger fires to extinguish. Yet, late at night, alone in a cheap hotel room with a flickering desk lamp, he sometimes pictured Ava lying in that hospital bed, her face contorted in pain, heartbreak etched into every line. He remembered how she pleaded with him to show even a semblance of concern, how she begged him to leave Nicole behind. Each memory struck him like a blow, fueling the knots of anxiety that robbed him of sleep. He never dared to pick up the phone and call her. Shame paralyzed him. When the SEC investigation reached its climax, the press feasted on the story of James Winston's spectacular collapse. Reporters recounted how the same man who once hosted glittering rooftop soirees at his penthouse now faced potentially ruinous penalties. New York's high society turned its back on him, a pariah who had betrayed both business ethics and, rumor had it, his own pregnant wife. The public devoured every tidbit, particularly the gossip that James's mistress had also abandoned him at the first whiff of financial disaster. Sitting in the drab lobby of his lawyer's office, scanning the tabloids that displayed his photo under headlines like "Winston's Folly" and "From Wall Street Wizard to Nobody," James finally began to grapple with an unthinkable truth. He was alone. The carefully constructed empire of wealth and influence had evaporated, and the woman for whom he had sacrificed his marriage was gone. He had lost not just money, but the respect of his peers and, most devastatingly, any moral claim to being a good man. Somewhere in a small, quiet apartment across town, Ava was recovering, focusing on their fragile newborn son. She was too busy surviving both physically and emotionally to revel in the downfall of the man who had hurt her so deeply. But fate, karma, or sheer poetic justice had seemingly stepped in to finish what James himself had started. While he sank into disgrace, Ava, unbeknownst to him, was finding a renewed sense of purpose and inner strength. Ava had settled into her new apartment routine with Oliver. Though finances were tight, she made ends meet by returning to her illustration work, mainly in the evenings when Oliver slept. Elise pitched in with babysitting and moral support, Each day, Ava grew stronger, physically and emotionally. Her heartbreak over James cooled into a quiet resolve. She focused on Oliver's future, his health checkups, immunizations, and the everyday joys of watching her baby smile, coo, and grow. Her phone buzzed with news updates about James Winston's scandal. She tried to avoid them for her sanity, but snippets would reach her. She learned that Winston Capital had declared bankruptcy, that James was embroiled in multiple lawsuits, possibly facing criminal charges if the investigation confirmed illegal activities. She felt no triumph at his downfall, merely a somber acceptance that karma had indeed come knocking. One afternoon, while she was gently rocking Oliver to sleep, Ava's intercom buzzed. She answered, expecting a package delivery. Instead, a breathless voice crackled through. "It's James. Please, I need to talk." Ava froze, her heart pounding with a blend of anger and residual hurt. She contemplated refusing him entry, but curiosity, or perhaps closure, made her press the button to let him in. Moments later, James stood at her doorstep. His once immaculate appearance was replaced by wrinkled clothes, dark circles under bloodshot eyes, hair that looked as though it hadn't been trimmed or styled in weeks. He offered a shaky smile. "Ava," he said softly, his voice trembling, "I'm sorry to just show up, but I need to see my son." She crossed her arms over her chest, blocking the doorway. "That's convenient. Now that everything's fallen apart, you remember you have a son?" He flinched, as though her words were physical slaps. "I deserve that. I messed up. I made horrible choices, and I can't undo them. But I want to try to make amends." Ava's eyes brimmed with tears she fought to keep at bay. A swirl of conflicting emotions pinned her. "James, you crushed me. You chose another woman. You paraded her in the hospital while I was on the brink of losing our child. Do you have any idea how that felt?" He winced. "I'm so sorry," he murmured. "I can't justify it. All I can say is that I was lost, caught up in this life I thought I wanted. I took you for granted, and by the time I realized how far gone I was, I'd already broken us." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound coming from Oliver's gentle coo in the other room. Finally, Ava stepped aside. "You can see him, but don't expect forgiveness. I'm doing this for Oliver, not you." He nodded, tears brimming. She led him to the small living area where Oliver lay in a bassinet, stirring in his slumber. James approached gingerly, gazing at the tiny face. When Oliver's eyes fluttered open, James reached out a tentative hand. The baby's fingers curled around his father's. A choked sound escaped James's throat. "He's beautiful," James whispered, tears now streaming freely. "Thank you, Ava, for bringing him into this world." Ava swallowed back her own surge of emotion. Despite everything, seeing James hold their child awakened memories of the man she had once loved, but those memories were overshadowed by the pain he'd caused. James stayed for an hour, rocking Oliver, offering him a bottle. He spoke haltingly about his plans to cooperate with investigators, to possibly rebuild once the storm passed. He admitted that Nicole had left him. "She was never worth what I gave up," he said, shame coloring his tone. Before leaving, he turned to Ava. "I know I don't deserve your compassion, but if you can ever find it in your heart to let me be part of Oliver's life, I'd do whatever it takes." Ava exhaled. "I'll think about it," she said, voice firm. "I won't deny our son the chance to know his father, but I will protect him from disappointment. And I won't let you hurt me again." He nodded, accepting. "I understand. Thank you." As the door closed behind him, Ava felt a complicated whirl of emotions: relief, sadness, a glimmer of hope. She realized she was no longer the shattered woman in that hospital bed. She was someone stronger, tempered by betrayal, anchored by her love for her child. Whatever James's fate, she was determined to forge her own path forward, free from the illusions that once ensnared her. In the months that followed, James faced a grueling legal process. Miraculously, no criminal charges were filed against him, likely because he cooperated fully with investigators and cut a deal to avoid prosecution. He lost nearly all his wealth, enduring heavy fines and settlements. The media branded him as a cautionary tale of greed and downfall. At the same time, James made earnest efforts to be part of Oliver's life. He would come by the modest apartment on weekends, bringing small toys or baby clothes he could afford. He eventually found a job as a low-level consultant in a tiny investment advisory far from the empire he had helmed, but enough to keep a roof over his head. Step by step, he tried to mend things with Ava, though she maintained her distance, co-parenting with cautious boundaries. Despite it all, Ava found herself stepping into a version of life that was unexpectedly peaceful. Freed from the grand illusions and heartbreak, she focused on her career, building a portfolio as a talented illustrator. Her children's books gained traction, and she secured a contract with a respected publisher. She moved into a slightly larger place, one with a little balcony where she and Oliver could enjoy sunsets. On Oliver's first birthday, Ava organized a small gathering of close friends. James was invited. He showed up, humble and subdued, grateful for any morsel of acceptance. Seeing Oliver's grin as he tried to smash cake in his tiny hands reminded everyone how life can blossom from the darkest moments. In time, Ava reached a fragile truce with James. She didn't love him the way she once did. Those illusions were shattered, but she saw hints of remorse and genuine care for Oliver. She allowed him to babysit occasionally, slowly trusting that he would never again abandon his son. James, for his part, seemed determined not to squander this second chance at fatherhood. The scars remained, reminders of a betrayal that had nearly destroyed Ava. Yet she learned that heartbreak, when faced bravely, could forge a stronger sense of self. She emerged not as a victim, but as a survivor and a devoted mother, determined to build a life of honesty and love for her child. And what of Karma's final tally? It had exacted its price from James in the form of public disgrace, financial ruin, and the agony of losing the woman he had once adored. He lived with that knowledge every day, a constant reminder of the cost of selfishness and betrayal. Yet the humbling forced him to confront who he had become, allowing the faint possibility of redemption to take root. In the end, Ava and James's paths diverged. Hers stretched forward with hope and independence. His was lined with repentance and the slow climb toward respectability. They would always share a bond through Oliver, an innocent soul who had survived his parents' trials before he even opened his eyes to the world. As for Nicole, her name vanished from Ava's life like a ghost at sunrise, remembered only as the catalyst who led James astray, or, perhaps more accurately, the mirror reflecting who he chose to be. And so we end this tumultuous tale where even the brightest fairy tale can shatter under the weight of betrayal, but also where hope can rise from the ashes. Ava's life wasn't merely salvaged, it was reborn. Through heartbreak, she found a fiercer strength, and through motherhood, she discovered a profound purpose that no misdeed could taint. As for James, his fortunes crumbled faster than they'd been built, a glaring lesson that no amount of wealth can shield you from karma's reckoning. Yet even in the face of ruin, second chances, though rare, can offer a path to change. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster. If you enjoyed this story or found it meaningful, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more captivating stories to life. Until next time, remember, true wealth comes not from fortunes, but from loyalty, love, and the power of personal redemption.